The wind was colder than usual that night, and the pine trees of Northwood Forest moved like tall shadows whispering among themselves. The small town of Hillsbrook had always been quiet, but during the last few months, people had started disappearing. Young hikers, campers, travelers wandering too close to the woods and never returning. Locals spoke in low voices about something old living deep inside, something that waited for anyone foolish enough to enter after dark. Miles Turner, a 28-year-old delivery driver, had no belief in supernatural stories. He had moved to Hillsbrook for a fresh start, hoping to escape the stress of his old life. His job required long routes through rural areas, and he often passed the forest without thinking. Twice, he saw strange lights flickering between the trees, but he ignored them, thinking they were hunters or maybe kids partying in the woods. One evening, while returning from a late delivery, Miles noticed a car parked on the roadside with its doors open. The headlights were still on, and the interior light flickered as if someone had rushed out in panic. Miles slowed his truck and stepped outside, calling for anyone nearby, but he heard nothing, only the forest breathing cold air into the night. He walked closer and found a torn jacket lying near the tree line. He picked it up and felt something cold dripping from the sleeve. When he lifted it, the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. He turned back toward his truck, but something moved between the trees. A tall, thin shape sliding silently across the darkness, like a shadow detached from the night itself. Miles felt a sudden wave of fear deep in his stomach. He stepped backward, his breath shaking. He climbed into his truck and locked the doors. The shape never came out, but he could feel it watching him through the blackness of the forest. For the next few nights, Miles could not sleep. He kept hearing a soft tapping on his window at exactly 3 in the morning. The first night, he thought it was a tree branch. The second night, he thought maybe an animal. The third night, he knew he was wrong because the tapping was too controlled, too slow, too deliberate, as if a hand with long fingers was knocking gently. Miles stopped going near the forest, but the forest started coming near him. On his late-night routes, he saw movement on the roadside, a pale figure crouched near a fallen log, a silhouette standing perfectly still beside a tree, a pair of eyes reflecting light like an animal, but set too high up to be from any animal he knew. One night, something forced him to stop. A woman was standing in the middle of the road, her hair long, her clothes torn, her skin almost white. She was whispering something too low to understand. Miles opened the window slightly enough to hear her voice. It sounded like wind passing through broken glass. The woman lifted her head, and her eyes were black from end to end. She whispered that she needed help and slowly raised her hand, pointing toward the forest. Miles drove away, but the image burned into his mind. He went to the sheriff the next morning, trying to explain, but the sheriff only told him to stay away from the woods. "That forest has things we don't talk about," he said, and his face showed more fear than authority. Days passed, but the woman kept appearing. Sometimes he saw her reflection in his mirror, even though no one was outside. Sometimes he heard her voice inside his truck, whispering from the back seat. He began losing weight, barely eating, rarely sleeping. His coworkers noticed dark circles under his eyes and his hands shaking whenever someone mentioned the forest. One night, while driving home, Miles felt something crawling beneath his seat, slowly moving upward. He pressed the brakes and jumped out, shivering. The truck door opened by itself, and a long shadow spilled out onto the road, as if poured from inside. The shadow stretched toward the forest, and once again the trees moved without wind, as if welcoming something home. Miles tried leaving the town, but every road he took led him back near the forest. every turn looped, every sign repeated. Every mile brought him to the same dark tree line, as if the forest had grown around him, closing every exit, trapping him in a maze designed by something ancient. On the final night, Miles heard the tapping again, but this time it came from all windows at once, soft, rhythmic tapping from invisible hands. He shut his eyes, but a voice spoke right beside his ear, not outside, but inside the truck, cold and whispering that it was time to return. Miles ran out of the truck, sprinting toward the town, but the night felt endless, the sky darker than it had ever been. He could hear footsteps behind him, but they made no sound on the ground, as if the thing chasing him was floating. He reached the first house in town, banging on the door and begging for help. The door opened slowly. An old man stood inside, his face pale, his hands shaking. He looked at Miles with hopeless eyes and quietly stepped aside, telling him to come in. Miles rushed inside, locking the door behind him. The old man told him something that froze every drop of blood in his body. The forest chooses who it wants, and once it marks you, nothing can save you. It will take your reflection first, then your shadow, and at the end, it will take you. Miles turned toward the window. The moonlight fell onto the floor, but his body cast no shadow at all. The old man told him to run before the forest reached the town. Miles stepped outside, trembling. The streets were silent, every house dark. The wind carried a whisper, calling his name softly, lovingly. Miles walked toward the forest, unable to resist. His feet moved without his permission. The trees opened a path for him, welcoming him into the darkness. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became, until there was no sound, no wind, no life, only the cold presence of something watching him, breathing near him, touching the back of his neck with invisible fingers. Miles disappeared that night. No one ever saw him again. But sometimes, people driving past the forest swear they see a figure standing near the tree line, a pale shape with dark eyes watching the road quietly, as if waiting for someone to stop. And sometimes at 3 a.m, drivers report a gentle tapping on their windows, even when no one is there.